I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this at 44, sleeping with someone half my age, and definitely not for reasons driven by revenge. But that's the funny thing about life, right? Just when you think you've seen everything it can throw at you, it hits you with something completely unexpected, a real punch to the gut. But before I get too far ahead of myself, let me rewind and tell you how I got here. So, here I am, David, just a regular middle-aged guy. Nothing too special about me. At least there wasn't, not until all this craziness started. I've been married to Rachel for 16 years. We met when we were in our late 20s, back when I still had a little more hair and a lot less gray. She was one of those women who could light up any room, make everyone feel like they were the most important person there. Honestly, I thought I was the luckiest guy alive. Our marriage wasn't anything extraordinary, but then again, what marriage really is. Sure, we had our ups and downs, but I always figured we'd work through them. We weren't the type of couple who constantly gushed over each other, but we made it work. We had our arguments, of course, but we always found a way to patch things up. At least that's what I thought. Now, I realize I was just another clueless husband, convinced that as long as we pushed through the hard times, everything would be fine. And then there was Mark, my so-called best friend. We'd known each other for nearly 20 years, ever since we worked together. The guy had been through a lot. His wife died in a car crash about 10 years ago, leaving him with their daughter, Sophia, who was only 10 at the time. I remember how devastated he was. That first year, he could barely function. But Rachel and I, we were there for him every step of the way, especially Rachel. She took on a motherly role with Sophia, almost like she was trying to fill the gap left by Mark's wife. Sophia practically lived at our house. She called me Uncle David, and over time, she became comfortable enough to confide in me about things she didn't want to talk to her dad about. Teenagers can be like that, right? I always thought of her like a little sister, and I guess she saw me more like an older brother. She'd come to me with her teenage drama, the usual stuff, boys, school, you name it. Mark appreciated it, or at least I thought he did. Since we lived nearby, they'd often stop by without any notice, just like family. It was normal. Hell, Mark might as well have lived here. But I never imagined that this easy familiarity would spiral into something much darker. And then everything changed in one moment. I wasn't supposed to be home that day. I was at work just going through the motions when this sharp pain hit me right in the stomach. My boss, a decent guy, told me to take the rest of the day off and head home. So I did, thinking I'd just crawl into bed and sleep off whatever was going on. But when I pulled into my driveway, something felt wrong. Mark's car was parked there. Again, not unusual. He left it there often, dropping by to chat or grab a drink. But this time something felt off. Maybe it was my gut instinct, maybe just paranoia, but I knew something wasn't right. The front door was locked, which never happened. We lived in a quiet neighborhood where no one locked doors during the day, especially when we had guests over. But there it was locked. I pulled out my keys, let myself in, and the house was unnervingly quiet. Too quiet. Then I heard it. It started faint, but I knew what it was: moaning, gasps, muffled voices. My heart sank. I couldn't believe it. I thought to myself, no, this can't be real. But it was. I didn't think about it. I just acted. My legs moved faster than my brain could catch up. I headed upstairs, every step like I was walking deeper into a nightmare I couldn't escape. And I wasn't going up empty-handed. I grabbed the bat from the closet on my way. I wasn't about to just stand there. When I reached the bedroom door, I froze. For what felt like forever, I stood there. Then, without a second thought, I pushed it open. What I saw hit me like a freight train. There was my wife, my Rachel, straddling my best friend. They both froze. The color drained from their faces the moment they saw me standing there, bat in hand. Rachel's mouth hung open, but no words came out. Mark scrambled off the bed like a frightened animal. I didn't say anything. I just walked toward him and slammed the bat into the floor, hard enough to splinter the wood. He flinched, but I wasn't aiming at him. Not yet. I didn't need to say anything. Their faces said it all. Rachel was the first to find her voice. David, wait. Don't do something stupid. Please, let's talk. Talk. After everything? I dropped the bat, then I punched Mark in the face. Once, then again, then again. The third punch split his lip, blood dripping down his chin. Rachel screamed, trying to pull me off him, but I was too far gone to care. Mark, finally gasping for air, looked up at me in horror. "What the hell, man?" he spat, his voice full of panic. "David, it's not what you think," he stammered, but I couldn't listen. "How long?" I growled, my voice shaking with anger. "How long has this been going on?" Neither of them could answer. They were pathetic. I didn't wait for their excuses. I just left. I grabbed the bat, stormed out of the house, and destroyed Mark's car, smashed the windshield, dented the hood, broke the side mirrors. The whole time, I couldn't stop thinking, how the hell did it come to this? I got in my own car, started driving, not sure where I was going. But then the thought hit me. I needed a drink. No, scratch that. I needed to get absolutely wasted. So I drove straight to the bar, the only place where I could make sense of anything. I walked in still clutching the bat, like it was my last line of defense against the chaos my life had become. The regulars were there, nursing their drinks, lost in their own worlds, just like me. I didn't say a word when I sat down at the bar, but I could feel all eyes on me. It's not every day you see a guy like me strolling in at noon, especially looking the way I did, like I had just come back from some kind of war. "Whiskey," I muttered, not bothering to look up at the bartender. I didn't have to. He knew. Tom was his name, a solid guy. He'd seen more than his fair share of crap over the years. He'd been working that bar longer than I could remember, always ready with a joke or some words of wisdom, depending on what you needed. You didn't ask questions. You just ordered, and he'd pour. Simple as that. I knocked back the whiskey in one go, barely feeling the burn as it slid down my throat. By the time I was on my third glass, Tom leaned in a little closer, raising an eyebrow. "Everything all right, David?" His voice was calm, like he'd heard it all before. And maybe he had. Still, there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. Nobody had ever seen me like this. Not in all the years I'd been coming here. I let out a short, bitter laugh, more of a bark than anything. "You ever walking on your wife sleeping with your best friend?" Tom's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't look shocked, almost like he'd heard it before. "Shit," he muttered, letting out a low whistle. "That's rough, man." "Rough doesn't even begin to cover it," I muttered, swirling the whiskey in my glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. I stared at it, hoping it might offer some kind of answer, some way to make sense of all this. But of course it didn't. Nothing did. I don't even know why I told him everything. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe I just needed to get it out of me before I completely lost it. But I spilled everything. How I walked in on them, the look on their faces, the sound of the bat cracking against the floor. I told him about smashing Mark's car, about the punches, about how I felt like my whole world had been ripped away. Tom didn't interrupt when I finished. He just patted me on the shoulder, his hand heavy, but somehow comforting. "That's a shitty situation, man. No other way to put it." I nodded, staring down at the empty glass in front of me. Shit, that was all I could say. But Tom wasn't done. He leaned in closer. "The main thing," he said, his voice dropping a bit, "is not to break down. Don't let them win." I looked at him, really hearing the weight of his words. "What would you do if you were me?" Tom didn't hesitate. "Me? Well, I'd probably do exactly what you're doing now. Get drunk off my ass. Maybe break something." He poured himself a drink and clinked it against mine. "Hell, let's make it official. To shitty friends and cheating wives," he said, and for the first time all day, I managed a real smirk. We both knocked back our drinks. But after that, he set his glass down with a thud, his eyes hardening. "I want revenge. The kind that leaves them with nothing. Take it all from them. Your wife, your so-called friend. Make them regret the day they ever crossed you." His words hit me harder than the whiskey. Revenge. It was exactly what I wanted, wasn't it? To make them suffer. To tear their lives apart, just like they'd torn mine. "I'll do it," I said, my voice low but firm. "I'm going to take them down. Leave them with nothing." Tom nodded, a bit of approval in his eyes, but his face softened. "Just be smart about it, David. You're a good guy. Don't let this turn you into something you're not." Hours slipped by, and by the time the bar was emptying out, I was so drunk I could barely see straight. I didn't even know how I was going to get home, but at that point I didn't care. My mind was too foggy with whiskey and anger to focus on anything else. Tom must have seen the state I was in before I could even think about stumbling out to my car. He grabbed my keys and slid them across the counter. "You're not driving anywhere, David. Pick these up when you're sober." I opened my mouth to protest, but honestly, I was in no condition to argue. So, I just nodded and slumped back onto the stool. "Taxi's on the way," Tom said, already on the phone. When the cab showed up, I barely managed to get myself into the back seat without falling over. The driver didn't say a word. Thank God for that. I spent the whole ride staring out the window, the city blurring by like it wasn't even real. I don't remember much after that. Just stumbling through the front door of my house. The same house where everything had fallen apart. It felt so empty, like it wasn't even my life anymore. I collapsed onto the couch, still fully dressed, and passed out. The next morning, I woke up with the worst hangover of my life. My head felt like a truck had run over it, and my mouth was dry as hell. Every muscle in my body ached. But the worst part wasn't the physical pain. By the time I crawled off the couch that afternoon, my head was still pounding, but I had no time to dwell on it. I knew what I had to do next. The divorce wasn't going to take care of itself. I grabbed my phone and called the first divorce lawyer I could think of. A guy named John. Met him a few years back at a work event. We kept in touch over the years, and I knew he handled cases like mine. "John, it's David. I need to talk about a divorce," I said flatly, not in the mood for small talk. "Damn, David. Didn't expect this call from you," John said, his voice a mix of surprise and sympathy. "All right, give me the rundown." I gave him the basics: Rachel, the affair, how long we'd been married, but I held back on the details. With John, though, he needed everything. If I was going to make sure Rachel didn't walk away with a damn thing, I had to give him everything. When I hung up, I felt a little better. Just a little. That's when I saw it. Rachel's work laptop, sitting on the dining room table. She had some big presentation the next day, something she'd been stressing over for weeks. It was a make-or-break situation for her career, and I knew how much she'd been sweating over it. And then it hit me, an idea for my revenge. A way to make her life a little harder. I sat down and opened the laptop, scrolling through her files until I found the presentation. I wasn't some tech genius, but I knew enough to make a few changes that would mess things up for her. I scrolled through the slides, trying to figure out where to strike. Then, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Rachel's meeting was with a group of high-powered executives from a Korean company. A quick search online led me to exactly what I needed, stuff that could seriously offend them. Subtle enough that no one would catch it at first, but enough to create serious tension. I slipped it right in the middle of her presentation, tucked in just enough that it wouldn't be noticed until it was too late. And I didn't stop there. I decided to add a few images, discreetly placed but strategically timed, just far enough into the slides that she would be caught off guard during her big moment. I wasn't just going to make her marriage fall apart. No, I was going to make her whole damn career crumble too. My head was still pounding, but I didn't care. I took some painkillers and laid down. I wasn't feeling great, but by the time Rachel came home, I felt a little more grounded. She walked in like everything was just another day, thinking she could talk her way out of this like she always did. "David, we need to talk," she said, her voice calm, but there was that familiar edge to it, the one that made my skin crawl. I didn't even look at her. "Go to hell, Rachel. We're getting a divorce." She didn't even flinch. "You're a fool," she sneered, crossing her arms. She probably thought I'd cool down and we'd go back to pretending everything was fine. Like this was just some petty disagreement about bills or dinner. "We'll see who the fool is," I snapped, standing up and heading for the porch. I had no intention of staying in the same house as her that night. It was big enough for the both of us, but it felt like a cage. I wasn't going to sleep in the same bed. So, I figured I'd just crash on the couch again. But as it turned out, I couldn't even make it through the night in that house. A few hours after midnight, my phone buzzed. At first, I thought it was just another telemarketer, but when I saw the name, Sophia, Mark's daughter, I froze. I answered, my voice groggy. "Hello." At first, her words were slurred, hard to understand, but eventually, it became clear. She was drunk, very drunk. She'd been at a party, and now she couldn't get home. So, she called me. She didn't want her dad to know, and I guess I was the only person she trusted enough to help. I quickly got dressed, grabbed my keys, and drove to the address she gave me. When I arrived, Sophia was leaning against a wall, swaying. The stench of alcohol hit me, as soon as I got close. She could barely stand, and when she stumbled toward the car, I opened the door for her. She almost fell into the passenger seat. "Sophia, what the hell?" I asked, voice filled with concern. "This isn't like you." She waved me off, her head resting against the seat. My boyfriend," she slurred, barely holding back tears. "He cheated on me." She was a mess, drunk, emotional, and all over the place. I couldn't help but feel for her. I knew that feeling all too well. "You're not the only one who's been betrayed," I said, trying to keep my eyes on the road. She turned toward me, clearly intrigued by the shift in my tone. "Who else?" she asked, almost curiously. I sighed and told her, in as few words as possible, about Rachel and Mark, leaving out the ugly bits, but enough to give her the gist of what had happened. "Oh, Uncle David," she whispered, leaning in close. Her hand found its way to my leg. "I'm so sorry." At first, I thought she was just trying to comfort me. But then, her hand stayed there, slowly moving, creeping up my leg. I felt my whole body tense up. "Sophia, stop," I said, pushing her hand away. But she didn't stop. She just kept going, her touch growing bolder. Her drunken advances were impossible to ignore. "I just want to make you feel better," she murmured, her hand finding its way back to my thigh. I resisted. I tried to, at least. But the anger, the betrayal, the alcohol, it all collided inside me. Maybe it was revenge. Maybe it was just the booze talking. But at some point, I stopped caring. When she unzipped my pants and bent down, I didn't stop her. She was good. And for that one moment, I wasn't thinking about Rachel or Mark or anything other than the feeling of crossing a line I could never come back from. When she finished, she leaned back with a smug grin, lipstick smeared all over her face. "There's a hotel nearby," she said, her voice low and suggestive. "You don't want to go home, and neither do I." I didn't argue. We left. We went to the hotel where everything blurred into the night. The kind of night where nothing mattered. Age didn't matter. Nothing mattered but that instant. By morning, I woke up to the pounding headache I'd expected. The reality of what had happened came crashing back down, but it was too late. I had already crossed a point I couldn't undo. We walked out of the hotel into the early morning light. It felt surreal, like everything should be normal, but the weight of what had happened hung heavy in the air. Sophia broke the silence, lighting a cigarette. She took a long drag, blowing the smoke out slowly like she didn't have a care in the world. "You know," she said casually, as if we weren't just coming from a hotel, "you could show that picture to my dad." I stopped dead in my tracks. "What?" She didn't look at me, just stared ahead, a grin tugging at her lips. "I mean, you could show him that picture of me. I don't give a fuck anymore." I couldn't make sense of what she was saying. "Why the hell would you want me to do that?" Sophia shrugged, still grinning, like this was some sick game. "I've been wanting to get away from him for years. He won't let me go. Every time I talk about leaving, he pulls that 'you won't survive without me' shit. I'm done with it, David. Maybe if he sees the picture, he'll finally get it. Maybe he'll let me live my life." I just stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. This wasn't just teenage rebellion. This was years of being trapped under her father's thumb, suffocated, manipulated. And she was using me, using what we had done, to try and escape it. I told her I wasn't going to do it, but deep down I knew I was lying. The idea had already planted itself in my mind. It was the perfect way to get back at Mark, just one more way to destroy everything in my path. She shrugged, flicking the cigarette but onto the sidewalk. "Suit yourself." She didn't care, not in the slightest. It was like she was indifferent to the whole mess, like she had already let go of everything. No consequences, no guilt. She threw one last line over her shoulder. "But if you change your mind, you know where to find me." I didn't respond, just dropped her off and drove away in silence. The whole way home, her words replayed in my head, over and over. I couldn't stop thinking about that damn photo. The image of her face, her makeup smeared, that smirk still lingering as she left traces of lipstick on my skin. It was like a warning, like a bomb ticking away, ready to blow everything apart. And if I'm honest, part of me wanted it to explode. I wanted the destruction. I wanted to burn every last bridge, leave nothing behind but ruins and ashes. When I got home, The atmosphere was thick with tension, like something was about to snap. Even before I walked inside, I could feel it. Rachel's laptop sat untouched on the dining room table, a silent witness to the mess I had set in motion. She had no idea how badly I had wrecked her life. That presentation, the one she'd been obsessing over for weeks, the one she was counting on to save her career, it was already a disaster waiting to happen. She had no idea how much I'd messed it up, and it didn't take long to find out. Rachel came storming through the door just before dinner, slamming it so hard it rattled the pictures on the walls. She didn't even look at me. Her face was twisted with rage. Pure un filter drage. Without a word, she hurled her laptop across the room. It slammed into the wall with a sickening crack, the screen splintering into pieces on impact. "You fucking idiot," she screamed, her voice raw with fury. "You did this, didn't you?" I didn't move from my spot on the couch, staring at her with a calmness I didn't feel. "Maybe," I said, almost nonchalantly. She marched across the room, eyes blazing, her face flushed with anger. "You sabotaged my presentation, didn't you? You asshole. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I just watched her, unshaken. "Yeah, I know exactly what I've done." She stood there, hands trembling with rage, and for a second, I thought she might actually hit me. But then she spat out the words I wasn't ready to hear. "They fired me, David. They fucking fired me. Right in front of everyone." Her voice broke, but the anger didn't fade. "Do you even know what that means? No company is going to hire me now. I'm done. Finished." I raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "Good." Her scream was a mix of desperation and rage. She grabbed the back of a chair and flung it to the side. "You ruined me. You've ruined everything. And for what? To get back at me?" And then she hit me with the truth. "Well, fuck you, David. Because guess what? I've been sleeping with Mark for years. We didn't even wait until after his wife's funeral. You were too stupid to see it. That hit me like a punch in the gut. Betrayal? Sure, I'd expected it. But the timeline, starting right after his wife died, that was a whole new level of cruelty. My stomach turned, while rising in my throat. How had I been so blind? How could I have supported Mark through his loss, not knowing he and Rachel were betraying me the whole time? I stood up, fists clenched tight at my sides. "Go to hell, Rachel." She stormed off, slamming the bedroom door behind her. And just like that, she was gone, at least for the time being. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I sat back down, my mind spinning. That's when I grabbed my phone. I scrolled through my messages until I found Mark's name. I hesitated just a second before I hit send on the photo. The one of Sophia, her makeup a mess, that look of regret on her face. The image was on its way to Mark, the last nail in the coffin. I didn't care what came next. I just wanted him to feel the same chaos and pain that had been eating me alive. 15 minutes later, Mark's car screeched to a halt outside my house. No knock, no warning. The door swung open, and he stormed in, his face twisted in rage, fists clenched at his sides. "What the fuck is this, David?" he bellowed, holding up his phone. His daughter's face stared back at me. I didn't even stand up. "What do you think it is?" I shot back, and that's when the first punch landed. His fist crashed into my jaw, and I staggered back, but I wasn't going to back down. I swung right back at him. We collided into the coffee table, crashing through it in a blur of punches, shoves, and grabbing anything we could to hurt each other. This wasn't some dramatic movie fight. It was raw, primal. Two men, torn apart by betrayal, doing whatever we could to make the other feel as broken as we were. Eventually, we ended up on the floor, bruised, bloodied, and exhausted. We lay there, panting, staring up at the ceiling like two dogs that had just fought to a standstill. Neither of us said anything. What was there to say? We'd both ruined our lives in different ways, and now we were left to pick up the pieces. That's when the sirens screamed through the silence. 10 minutes later, the cops were breaking down the door. A neighbor must have seen us fighting and called them in. They dragged us to our feet and shoved us into the patrol cars. I spent a few hours at the station, mostly sitting in silence. Neither of us pressed charges. We were too tired, too beaten down to keep the fight going. Eventually, they let us go with a warning. When I got home, something strange settled over me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt lighter. Not happy, not better, but lighter. There was something about letting go of all the anger and pain that had been eating me alive. I didn't care about Rachel, Mark, or Sophia anymore. They could all go to hell. In the end, maybe I was the one who burned it all down. But I was okay with that. Sometimes you've got to burn everything to the ground to survive. Rachel and I broke up quicker than I ever thought possible. After all the chaos, there was nothing left to save. No love, no trust, just a hollow shell of what used to be. It was like watching a building burn down, only realizing halfway through the fire that there was nothing worth saving. We signed the papers, divided the assets, and moved on with our lives. A few months later, we sold the house. It used to mean everything. Our home, where we made plans, fought over nonsense, and even shared some good memories. But in the end, it was just another piece of the wreckage. After everything had gone down, the house didn't feel like a home anymore. It was more like a tomb, silent, cold, and filled with the ghosts of arguments and betrayals. The walls seemed to echo with the ugly memories of it all, especially that final crash. I was actually relieved when it sold. That was it. Finally, I could close that chapter of my life and move on. Rachel and I both found new places to live. I settled into a small apartment on the other side of town. Nothing fancy, but it was mine, and that felt good. It felt like a fresh start, something I could finally control. I didn't care where Rachel ended up as long as it was far, far away from me. That was enough. I knew there was no chance I'd bump into her at the store or any of the places we used to go. We both needed space, and now we had it. Sophia, though she surprised me, after everything, she really took charge of her life. She moved out of her dad's house, found a solid job in another city, and started building a life for herself. Part of me was proud of her, even though I wasn't sure I had any right to feel that way. We still talk sometimes. Casual stuff, nothing deep. She checks in on me now and then, and I do the same. It's strange, though. We haven't seen each other since that night at the hotel. And honestly, I think we both know that's for the best. I never wanted anything to come of that night. What happened between us was just a one-time thing, an escape fueled by anger and alcohol. We were both looking for a way out, but neither of us was looking to make it something more. Some things are better left in the past. Rachel, on the other hand, didn't exactly land on her feet. The fallout from that botched presentation? It spread fast. Word gets around in her industry, and no one wanted to take a chance on her after that disaster. Getting fired was bad enough, but the rumors? The stories about what went down in that boardroom? That's what really killed her chances. She tried to find work, but nothing stuck. I heard she bounced around a bit, but no company would touch her. No one wants to hire someone who humiliated themselves in front of a room full of high-level execs. What really got under my skin, though, was hearing about her and Mark. Yeah, after everything blew up, they tried to make it work. Maybe they thought that since they'd already ruined their marriages, there was nothing left to lose. But the thing about a relationship built on lies is that it never lasts. The spark they had while sneaking around behind my back burned out fast when they had to face each other in the cold light of day. From what I heard, it didn't take long for things to go downhill. They started drinking heavily, just the two of them locked in a toxic cycle of booze and bitterness. I guess they thought drowning their problems in alcohol would help them forget, but it just made everything worse. When you start drinking to escape your problems, you don't just drown your problems, you drown yourself too. It wasn't long before their relationship fell apart. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that it all came to a head one night. A fight. Worse than usual. Mark hit her hard enough that she had to go to the hospital, and he ended up in jail. I don't know if she pressed charges, but I know he did. Time served. I didn't bother asking for the details. Frankly, I didn't care. They got what they deserved, one way or another. As for me, life started to look up. It wasn't a straight line to happiness, but slowly, things began to get better. I've always been the kind of guy who thinks he can handle everything on his own, that I don't need help. But after everything that happened, I realized I couldn't carry all that weight by myself. The anger, the betrayal, the guilt, it was like poison eating away at who I was. So I swallowed my pride and started seeing a psychologist. At first, it was tough, sitting there talking to someone who didn't know me, didn't know my story. But after a few sessions, I realized it was something I needed. I needed help to unpack all the mess I'd buried inside. It felt like lifting a weight off my shoulders that I didn't even know I was carrying. I also started going back to the bar more often. Tom, the bartender, had been there for me from the start, even if he didn't know the full story. One night after a few drinks, I finally told him everything about Rachel and Mark, about the picture, the fight. I half expected him to judge me, to look at me like I was some kind of monster, but he didn't. He just listened, nodding along like he'd heard it all before. When I got to the part about sending Mark the picture of his daughter, Tom let out a low whistle and shook his head. "Man," he said, pouring us both a shot of whiskey. "That's one hell of a story." We clinked glasses, then laughed about it. Not because it was funny. None of it was, but because sometimes laughing is all you can do. If you don't laugh, the weight of it all will crush you. Looking back on everything, I've wondered if I did the right thing. Was all the revenge worth it? Did it fix anything? No, probably not. But at the same time, it gave me closure in a way I wasn't sure I'd ever find. Rachel and Mark got what was coming to them. Sophia found her own way. And me? I'm still standing. So to anyone reading this, thanks for sticking around. I needed to get it off my chest. I needed to tell the whole story, start to finish. Life's messy. It's unpredictable. And sometimes it's downright cruel. But you deal with it. You move forward. And if you're lucky, you learn something along the way. Did I do the right thing? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. But in the end, I'm still here. And I'm still moving forward. That has to count for something, right? Good luck out there, folks. Life's a bitch, but sometimes you just have to laugh and keep going.